Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. Thanks for joining us today for this session. Hope you're having a great JNUC so far. I'm Akash Kamath from Jamf. It is my pleasure today to introduce Stephen Wick, who's going to talk to you about a very specific scenario some of you may have run into in terms of remediation, and that's with the CrowdStrike Falcon sensor, especially when it's protected with tamper-proof protection. There are some hoops you may have found you need to jump through. What Steven's going to show you today is a way where, through the magic of APIs and scripting, he has automated that to a point where you can get really flexible remediation scripts going. So without further ado, Steven.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Stephen Wick. I'm a senior solutions engineer at the Match Group, and I'm here to talk about the automated remediation of the CrowdStrike sensor. So in this session, we will cover the problem of basically why CrowdStrike is its own beast to remediate against, the script where we will do some deep dive API calls to make the magic happen, the automation to basically do some helpful ways to approach the desired outcome for the remediation, and then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A. So if you guys have ever tried to uninstall the CrowdStrike's Falcon agent with tamper-proof protection enabled, you've probably realized it's not that user-friendly. Having to pull the maintenance token from the web console and then using it to confirm the uninstallation locally on each device is a tedious process. When you spend 5 to 10 minutes removing one computer from the console, it makes you question if there's a better way. So you may be asking yourself, why would I want to uninstall a security agent? Well, current installed versions unable to update can cause issues checking in with the console and providing feedback. No longer checking in with the console definitely is a problem. Security will often flag that more often than not. You're switching to a different vendor, or just for basic troubleshooting purposes. So first of all, we'll need to create an API account in the Falcon console to generate a client ID and a client secret. This will be the connection that we are using to establish to pull the maintenance token from the API console. So you'll have to make sure that you have install, sensor download, read, and sensor update policies read, and then uninstall, host, write, and sensor update policy write. So again, this is the API account that you have in the CrowdStrike console that we'll be utilizing for this script. For those of you that have never worked with an API before, Swagger is a GUI for understanding and working out the code to execute API tasks manually without needing the complex code. So both Jamf and CrowdStrike support Swagger, and they have pages that I initially used to gather the correct commands and utilize them to kind of building the framework out. So below are all of the lists for the CrowdStrike, and then Jamf is above there as well. So now we'll jump into the script and the logic of actually going through it. So first, we are going to pull the bearer token from the CrowdStrike's API. And then we're going to pull the agent ID from the local machine. Then, once we have that, we will make the API call to retrieve the uninstall token, invalidate the access to the bearer token that we used in the previous steps, and then execute the uninstall using the acquired maintenance token. Oh, can we go back? All right, so first of all, we'll add the client ID and secret for our API access into CrowdStrike, and then we'll make the initial call for the access token. Yeah. At the end, I have a QR code with my GitHub, so you guys can download the script. So, yep, of course. So then this command, we're locally pulling the agent ID using awk and then extracting that value out. And note, the device ID and the agent ID are the same values. The API refers to the device ID, and locally, it's the agent ID. So here, this is the API we are making to target the uninstall token. We utilize the auth token and the agent ID variables we have previously gathered to then awk the maintenance token value from that response. And then after that, we make a statement to make sure that the value isn't empty and proceed on. This API call we're using to close out the access for the token that we've gathered. Typically, the tokens are set to a certain time to expire, but best practices is to close them out after they are no longer needed. We're using our ID and secret to convert that value to base 64 creds, and then executing the revoke command from there. And then the last step, back locally on the machine, we then execute the uninstall command. We're waiting for the prompt for the Falcon maintenance token, and then we pass the uninstall variable token along once that prompt has been popped up. And then after that, you can make your recommended reinstall call for the sensor after that. So we'll jump into the demo and see what it actually looks like. So starting with pulling the device ID, we make our first API call to pull the access token. As you can see, that big, long, secure text is essentially the access token in its raw form. We're then extracting the bearer token from that response and going to utilize that to make our calls. So now that we have the bearer token and the device ID to make our API calls, we pull the maintenance token from there. Once we have the maintenance token, we make the final API call to revoke the access and close out our API connection. From here, we initiate the uninstall command via command line and then pass the maintenance token when prompted. At this point, we are calling the reinstall policy via Jamf, but this is totally dependent on what your potential use case is. And then if you guys would like, here is the QR code to my GitHub where I have this script up and ready to go. Feel free to comment or suggest any updates on there, and I'll look forward to seeing your feedback. Go ahead. So really the biggest thing is we'll get to a point where the sensor doesn't check in. We had a handful of devices that were still running version 6 of the CrowdStrike sensor, and that really caused some issues with connection. So we had to do a full uninstall and reinstall in order to get those devices back into the fold.
If you have questions, just raise your hand. I'll bring the mic to you.
Does the uninstallation also clean up the console side of CrowdStrike, or is it going to potentially give like multiple duplicate entries due to the reinstallation process?
So really, this should only do the one uninstall. I'll jump over to these next slides that basically kind of targets the automation itself. So a couple ways that you can utilize this in bulk is to basically utilize smart groups. So you're targeting based off of a certain version or a certain installation method of how it's being portrayed. In this case, we're using patch reporting in Jamf to target all the versions essentially that are n-1, and then we can create a policy to target those devices to execute the script. Regex can also be used to create more in-depth criteria for this. Something to note on this is CrowdStrike does have capability for its own auto update. So it can update the sensor on its own, which could potentially interfere with this, but that's just something to kind of be aware of as you're going through this particular process. And then the last one that I have is for bulk imports. The mass update tool is available on GitHub, and you can utilize this to update devices in mass. So if, for instance, security gives you a list of, here's 150 machines we have to run this against, you can export this and create a CSV, and it will automatically add those devices into a static group that you can utilize to target these devices for remediation as well. So let's go ahead and open it up for questions at this point.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Have you run into the issue where the maintenance token that it pulls from the API, when you are running the uninstall, that it says that the maintenance token is incorrect for that device?
I haven't run into that particularly. I have seen devices that can't establish a connection to essentially CrowdStrike at all, and it essentially will fail and doesn't pull an actual maintenance token, but I haven't specifically ran into a mismatch of those specific credentials.
Thank you.
Are you doing anything that requires approvals from another team through an automation tool such as ServiceNow or something like that? Do you have any integrations with that in the way you're using it, or are you still pretty much doing this on a one-by-one scenario?
At this point, it's basically we get responses from our security team internally that say, hey, these devices need to be remediated in some fashion. Ideally, I'd like to get to a point where we could use kind of reporting tools that we have available that security is doing that, and then utilize Tines or Power Automate to essentially kind of automate this process start to finish so there isn't the user interaction. Really, the script is kind of the basis of the foundation of getting the automation working, and then it's kind of limitless for possibilities outside of that to what you want to scope it to, use case wise, or really kind of execution to make it work in your environment.
Are there any kind of gotchas or pitfalls you've run into that people should keep in mind as they move forward with, automating this?
Yeah, the biggest one is just getting that initial connection established with the API account. Just make sure that you double check and have access to that, those specific roles and responsibilities that I mentioned, because those specifically require access, and I ran into a scenario where I asked security for those, they provided me an account, it was working, and I couldn't get it to execute. Then had to go back to the security team, make sure that those values were checked, and then everything was working as needed. So really, it's just kind of start small, utilize testing, and go from there.
Thank you. Hi. I'm slightly confused on the use cases that you're presenting, because on one side that you're saying you're using this for remediating agents that aren't responding, but at the other side you've got smart grips there that looks like you'd be using this for updates. Are you using that for either or both of those?
Really dependent on scenario. We've gotten, essentially, if they're not connecting, that's one of the issues that you're just not going to be able to automate very easily because they're completely falling off. If you do have an established connection, but the sensor is corrupt or isn't auto-updating, this is a scenario where it's too far behind to hit the N-1 updates for CrowdStrike. This will kind of mitigate that and allow you to do an uninstall and reinstall, because it still has a API connection available. It's just having a problem with the sensor update to...
Yeah, but the API query is being done from the machine. It's not being done from CrowdStrike itself.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I always get worried putting a username and password into a policy, whether it be into the script or fed into the variable of a policy. Have you looked into ways to do this without including those API credentials to CrowdStrike?
Yes, the session in here right before us, I can't remember exactly what it was, but there is a gentleman's working on an API binary that basically allows you to encode this and run that specifically. I can't remember what the, here. API token tool. That will exactly address that, and he's working on essentially a proof of concept at this point, and that will get rid of the need for the credentials in the scripts.
Not really a question. This is great. By the way, I just wanted to answer about the invalid token. Try removing the hyphens from the agent ID, and you'll get a valid token from that. And then also for those that don't want to use this for remediation, you can also use the same process to set a grouping tag, which is pretty common in CrowdStrike as well, because you need the maintenance token for that. So that was all. Thank you.
So quick question, our security team also is pretty dense. They don't really allow us to have access to the console itself. What are the do you have like the information on the requirements of what that account would need for the API for us to work with it?
Yeah. I don't think I can go back. Can you go back to slide like 5 or 6? This one.
Okay.
So these specific accounts or specific roles are what you would need for that specific account. So really just talk with your security team, get a API access account with these specific roles, and you should be all set.
It's not a question, just I want to let know that. So somebody asked about the credentials. Without passing the credentials in the script, how we can manage, right? So tomorrow I have a session. I'm talking about the same stuff, that how we can skip the credential, passing it to the script and sending it to the endpoint, and how we can directly make in the cloud on this topic. So the session name is API Defense Tactics. So if anybody interested, you can join. Sorry, but just I thought of people are interested in that topic, so I'm letting them know.
As far as the defense on the tokens, I'm not really aware of anything that could potentially kind of combat that. I haven't done a lot of research on that at this point, but that'll be something I'll definitely look into moving forward.
So I kind of built a very similar process that you did, but in Tines, very low code. And it was a really fun experience. What I did, though, is I compared the check-in time to the from the Falcon dashboard to one of our endpoint tools like Intune or Ninja or Jamf, right? Computers will check in every 15, 30 minutes. And then if there's a 24-hour difference between those check-ins, then it flags the computer and then runs remediation. Which is actually the same way that you did it, running the uninstall token, reinstalling it, verifying that the agent's checking back in, and then if it does it twice, it will then open a ticket for our operations team to go manually remediate that device and find out why that sensor stops. So pretty cool to see this here because I just finished that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you. When you're going through the remediation process, do you need to factor in the system extension that CrowdStrike loads? I know normally it doesn't get removed until you reboot.
So this is essentially a remove and reinstall solution. It realistically will run through CrowdStrike's complete uninstall, and then you'd have to manually reinstall that after the fact. When I was doing this on my test devices, it pulls up as a new asset in CrowdStrike. So it's essentially just removing the current framework, reinstalling it, and re-adding it to your environment.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, nice job. Two related questions. First one, how many versions has this survived so far with Falcon? And then a follow-up on that. Has CrowdStrike giving any assurances that the output of Falcon CTL stats will be consistent going forward? I could have sworn at one point in time they had a warning on that, not to count on it as an API or something along that line. I don't see that in the help. I just looked at the help now. I don't see it now. Maybe they backtracked off that, and maybe they said it's good to go now, and you can always count on it. Just curious how stable that is.
I haven't gotten any assurances on it. It seems like API has always been changing. Even with like Jamf, we have the classic, and now we have the modern Jamf API that we're utilizing. So I don't particularly know status-wise, but what's nice is as long as they have access to Swagger, it's just a matter of finding what new potential call is, updating, modifying, and utilizing that call. As far as versions, I've tried it with version 6 and version 7. The point releases are a little, I haven't tested all of them, but for the major versions of 6 and 7, this works pretty well.
The permissions you had up on the screen earlier are just to read the token, you need all 4 of those? Or is it, can you go for a smaller permission set? Because I'm sure my security team's going to
I believe you need those essentially to do, I mean, you could always test it. Unfortunately, these were the ones that I kind of passed along to my security team, and it was the magic solution that I was able to utilize. So you can always, if you do have access, try and dial it back or see which one potentially would need it. But that was essentially the 4 that I found were essentially, in my testing, kind of required.
Okay.
I was just going to mention something that has helped us as we created a system extension for the CrowdStrike Falcon sensor on status. That usually is we can do a smart group if it's not connected, that it'll also retry. So we're happy to share that if anyone needs that, but that's all we've had to do to mitigate.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. Well, if there's no other questions, I just want to say thank you and appreciate you coming to my session.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks all.